part of the KIOS Distinguished Lecture Series, and we are very honored and happy to have with us today Dr. Eleni Pratsini, who is also the chair of the KIOS Advisory Board. I don't know, some of you already know that. So we have, she knows a lot about the KIOS Center of Excellence, and she's very much involved in some of the activities that we do. And she's visiting the center often, and we took this opportunity to ask her to give us a lecture. She has the industrial perspective, which I think is very important to what we do. And so we look forward to hear the presentation. Let me just say a few things about Eleni. She's the managing director at Accenture Technology, leading the growth of AI and automation business in Europe. Before joining Accenture in January of 2018, Eleni spent 14 years at IBM Research, leading research teams in advanced analytics and AI. In her most recent role, she was the director of Cognitive Internet of Things Solutions and lab director of IBM Research in Dublin Smart Cities Technology Center. Before joining IBM, she had a successful career in academia, first in the US as associate professor at Miami University in Ohio, and then in Europe at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH. Her teaching and research were recognized by a number of academic awards and industrial grants. She has a very diverse background, which covers her PhDs in quantitative analysis and industrial engineering from the University of Cincinnati. She has an MBA in finance from UCLA and a BSc in civil engineering from the University of Birmingham. And her topic today is the unstoppable growth of analytics and AI. Is industry really ready? So,
thank you, Marius, for the introduction. I'm very pleased and honored to be here and excited to share some of my, I would say, personal journey. So as Mario said, I recently joined Accenture, which is a consulting company. And prior to that, I spent many years in academia and in industrial research. So with the combination of slowly moving, I say slowly, going from the academic world to IBM research was like having one foot in academia and one foot in industry. I wasn't quite in industry. Now I am in industry, and I'm developing a new perspective of how industry accepts the different technologies that are being developed at the university, and I hope to share this perspective and experience with you. You might have seen similar images of the progression of AI. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. But what artificial intelligence means depends heavily on each person. So if you stop 10 people in the street and ask them what does that mean, you'll get 10 different answers. If you stop academics and ask them, you get more or less the same answer. But the truth is that industry interprets artificial intelligence in various different ways, and I'll explain and give a little bit of background on that. But the academic, or let's say the domain, the discipline of artificial intelligence is not new by any means, and you know it better than I do. The first conference on AI was in 1956 in the UK. There was a lot of hype at the time that we will develop systems that will behave like humans. Those are the golden years of 56 to 74. Then we realized, for various reasons, not having the computational power, not having the data, things are not moving as fast as we would have liked. We call the winters, when things slow down and people stop talking about AI. And then that's 74 to 80, then we had another one. So you see these cycles up and down. Definitely we are one of the up cycles now. We're in the summer, so to speak. A number of notable achievements that have been made. Certainly with my background, I'm very familiar with the chess the Deep Blue competition where a computer beat the chess Kasparov, the chess master, the Jeopardy, the Watson, the beginning of the Watson technologies from IBM with natural language processing and competing in a game, and most recently from Google, the AlphaGo, where a machine beat the best player in Go, which is considered a very difficult game for a machine to compete in. So there's this extreme evolvement of the field, and every year we feel that the advancements are much higher than before, the rate of increase of these advancements is much higher. From a business perspective, one interesting statistic or fact that you'll see is that if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, so the top 500 companies that in the world, and if we take the list from 2000, and then take the most, the biggest 500 companies today, and you compare the two lists, only half of them exist, of the 2,000 companies exist today. It's amazing. For example, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they were not in there in 2000, and they are at the very top now. So you see this tremendous change because of the technology advancement. With that background, let me just give you an overview of the presentation today. First, I'll talk a little bit about the facts, so give you a few more facts. Talk about the trends in terms of analytics and artificial intelligence. Talk about the hype, because definitely there's quite a bit of a hype. What does that mean? And then get into the fields of analytics, AI, what does it mean, how do we approach, and then try and give examples that have been applied in industry. And with each example, I'll relay the experience of how is it viewed from an industrialist perspective, how is it viewed from a research perspective. Do we really apply in industry what we develop at the universities? And I'll leave you with some thoughts, conclusions, and challenges that I see in this phase. Back in 2011, McKinsey had an analysis of the expectations that we have for potential impact in various industries or in various domains. So let's take the first one, location-based data, GPS tracking. There was expectation that it would bring a potential impact of 100 billion revenues and up to 700 billion value to end users. And then at the right-hand side, you'll see how well did we meet those expectations in 2017. So this was results captured in 2017. Not too bad. 50 to 60% of expectations were met. And I say not too bad because you'll see that that's the highest of the met expectations in the fields. Why? Because we all have a smartphone, there's a GPS tracking, and the pervasivity of smartphones really has helped with this achievement. But if we go to retail, where it was expected that the net margin will increase by 60% and we will have growth in productivity, we only got 30 to 40%. Not as well as we would have liked. Manufacturing, everyone talks about Industry 4.0, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Still, we didn't achieve, while you do have examples of companies that are quite advanced, overall as an industry, the expectations were only met at a quarter, 25%. Public sector the same, and while it talks about EU public, the US is also, and other advanced countries are also in that range, 10 to 20%. Healthcare the same. And if you read at the comments, by far the biggest issue is the siloed data being found in silo. So the ability of bringing the information together is very difficult. Marius mentioned that I was working in smarter cities from 2013 to 2016, and we did a lot of projects on smart cities with city councils or with cities. By far, the biggest issue we had was that cities themselves were also in silos. So if I wanted to do a transportation project for the city, for a particular city, there were at least two different departments I had to talk to. The city transportation, the highway transportation, urban, suburban, and so forth. And they would each fight, this is not my budget, it's someone else's budget. So sharing information in silos, also in the case of cities, is quite challenging. Data. We all talk about data, and there have been many studies that data is the most valuable resource. We say data is the oil, it's the new oil. There's also discussion that the next war will not be over oil, but it will be over data, who controls the data. And in 2017, The Economist came up with an article that you're probably aware of. And the summary is, basically the summary in that report is that, yes, indeed, big data is, big data, data analytics, data science, AI, merging all these fields that rely on data is the most significant trend in the 21st century. High expectations to transform everything, so we don't adapt to technology, we expect technology to adapt to us. Basically, we expect everything to be personalized. Risks and benefits, data science, it's at its infancy. I think we've done a lot of, taken a lot of strides forward, but still a lot to learn, and many changes coming ahead. What I found very interesting at the time was the example about Tesla. And this, again, remember, is from 2017. At the time, Tesla, first quarter of 2017, last year, it only sold 25,000 cars. Not that much, compared to GM that sold 2.3 million cars in the same time. However, Tesla was valued more, or was worth more than General Motors. Why? Because of its business model. Tesla has a business model that collects data. From that data, they can improve autonomous driving. They can improve a lot of the new trends that we see the automotive industry getting into. Again, it's the power of data behind that. Another thing I like to play with and I occasionally take a look at is the Gardner hype curves. Are you familiar with the hype curves? Okay. So maybe I'll go very fast through it. I thought it was interesting to see back in 2014 that when I circled, and I apologize for the, it's not very easy to read, but data science, big data is listed in there, and the community was very surprised to see that in 2015, those two were not listed. And I read the communication of people asking why what happened. The main, or the explanation in simple terms is that, yes, 2014 everyone started talking about big data. By 2015, it was felt that big data by itself is everywhere. So it's embedded in many of the other trends. You won't see it on its own. And data science. So we cannot do analysis on anything these days without getting into big data and data science. So it left. But a lot of the other trends are in there. You have smart advisors, for example. You have Internet of Things, it was just coming up. And if I go to 16, I thought it was very interesting, and you can, at your leisure, take a closer look at this. It was interesting that the smart advisor became, at the very top, cognitive expert advisor. So there was a slight change in the terminology. We started going from smart systems to cognitive systems to intelligent systems. A little bit of marketing, a little bit of an indication how we create trends using terminologies. But the one thing I got quite interested in, and it was completely outside my field, was the enterprise taxonomy and ontology management. So a little bit of a sideline here. My background is primarily from optimization systems, constraint, math programming, linear, nonlinear, and with stochastic parameters and inputs. And slowly I moved into the applications that get into the artificial intelligence domain. I had semantics and ontologies are for the field of artificial intelligence. And obviously, it's being picked up by the market. And I realize more and more the value that these fields bring to understanding the context of your environment for artificial intelligence applications. 2017, another trend there. Now we start seeing deep learning. And if I go to 2018, it becomes deep neural networks, etc. So some interesting observations there that you see. But it's always interesting to see the hype, how the expectations start, they reach a peak, and then how you come back to reality, and at the end you plateau at the realized value. What I should have said at the beginning is that these curves show expectations, not results. So it's what people expect. It's just the mood of the market. Okay, artificial intelligence. There's one slide we use a lot in Accenture, and I find it very helpful because it nicely describes how we use the different techniques to create solutions. So at the core, we rely on learning, machine learning. There's deep learning, there's shallow learning, there's reinforcement learning, there's supervised, unsupervised, etc. These are the mathematical techniques. We use machine learning to understand images. So we have the capabilities. The green inside, my circle. Here, this green here is the capabilities. We can have expert systems, predictive systems, speech analysis, speech to text, computer vision, knowledge representation, etc. And at the outer circle, we have the applications. So I can bring a lot of the capabilities together and have an industry solution. So I can have an intelligent agent that takes care of my agenda every day, my family life, my business life, and tells me exactly what I need to do to go through the day. That would be the application. Why is everyone talking about artificial intelligence these days? You know it better than I do. It's affordable, so a lot of the things we couldn't do before because we didn't have the computational power. Now we do. We're even getting into quantum computers that can really work on the infrastructure to enable things. We have accessibility to data we didn't have before, a lot of data, and of course, from an application perspective, software engineering perspective, we're full of APIs. What I enjoy very much in the way Accenture looks at the field of AI and analytics is that there's the belief that we don't do, in most applications, we don't do just AI or just analytics, but it's the whole spectrum of techniques. And we call that approach the applied intelligence approach, which allows us to untrap new insights, scale, get into new business models, and do things we couldn't do before. Now, the field, though, itself of artificial intelligence, which is the one that is getting the most attraction, at least from a scientific perspective, we can categorize it in two groups, or most people often think of it as two groups. What we do today on the left-hand side, and what the movies show can be done on the right-hand side. So today we do very narrow things. We train systems to understand that the image shows a dog or a cat or a car whatsoever. But we're not yet at the point where we put up an image and it can immediately identify every little aspect in the image. It has to be trained. So it's very narrow. On the other hand, we want to have these general systems that behave like humans. What's in between, though, what often doesn't talk is, though we do work on it scientifically, is this artificial broad intelligence where we train an image to identify a car, but maybe we can use most of that training to identify a truck. And it's a car of different dimensions and slowly increase the intelligence of the system. So we try to get into understanding a little bit better the context. And also we're talking a lot about trusted and explainable types of systems. So on our journey to go from narrow intelligence to general intelligence, via broad intelligence, there are certain elements that we need to consider. And I know academics have been working a lot on explainable AI, transparent AI, security systems. Industry only now is beginning to understand that AI on its own can be in some ways dangerous. There were some examples that you might be familiar with. Judicial system in the US was trained on different data to predict if a person is very likely to be a criminal or get engaged in a criminal activity or not. And they trained it on a system that was primarily consisted of whites being innocent, blacks being guilty or criminals. Certainly, if you train it on this experimental design, so this bias in your training set can bring real problems, and industry is picking up on that. So explainability and transparency is very important. Another one that I like, there was training on this picture. It showed a man in the kitchen cooking, right, to be a big chef. But the system was trained on women doing the cooking, so it came back and said, I see a woman in the kitchen cooking. And then the other one, you can tamper with data, and while on the left-hand side, the system recognizes this is a person. When you tweak on it and you put glasses on the person, all of a sudden it cannot identify the person. It just focuses on the sunglasses and saying this is the sunglasses. So, we laugh with these examples, but in reality, when you base your business decisions on this, it can be very problematic. Other topics that are really important, learning from small data. We don't always, but there's a lot of data. There's not always a lot of data that you can use. So learn from small data, get into transfer learning, look at the infrastructure, the role of quantum computers, etc. Okay, rather big introduction into the field, but many things you take as granted, in the academic environment, they're pretty new to the industry folks running a lot of the decisions. Now let's get into the Industrial Revolution, because a lot of the hype and also a lot of the advancements we see come and stem from this initiative, primarily from the German government, to get into Industry 4.0 and the fourth revolution. So we went through the first revolution with the steam engine, the second revolution, and I had not realized while I was in Cincinnati that actually the first industrial production line was in Cincinnati in a slaughterhouse. Then we have the programmable logic control as the third revolution, and now in the fourth revolution, it's the expectation and the goal, the vision, to have a system that gives us a complete end-to-end connectivity of our supply chain from inbound logistics to manufacturing to outbound logistics. It considers the IT, the information technology, but also the operational aspects. This is the vision. At the same time, when I look at the activities we have with manufacturing companies to see how many examples do we have of end-to-end interconnectivity, applying Internet of Things, all the sensors, etc. I realized, and I saw that basically we have three major components that clients discuss on the applications. It's the digital supply chain, yes. If I look at the transportation, warehousing, a bit of manufacturing, I want to digitize that and leverage all the sensors. It's the isolated problem of connecting the devices, so all the software engineering requirements that I can put together. I can connect thousands, if not millions of cars, because from a software engineering perspective, that is a challenge. And the digital product design, a little bit of design thinking in looking at processes differently, and modify your product in ways that serve the demand. Let me skip that, but go a little bit into an element. One of the main things we do in manufacturing and in many other applications is to automatically monitor a process and determine if there's an alert. Right? And we find that determining alerts or anomaly detection is one of the main components and activities that we need to incorporate. I like there the comment from Tolstoy. It says, "Oh, happy families are all alike." Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. When things are normal, they're all alike. But when something is not normal, it's not normal in its own way. Right? And the algorithms we need to detect the abnormality depends on the situation. So that makes it difficult to have a generalist to apply in every condition. So that creates a lot of requirements for the development of algorithms for anomaly detection, which is so key in monitoring processes. Normal, not normal. Why is it not normal? Every time for a different reason. And certainly if you have, if you work with sensor data, which is the case for Internet of Things, interconnected systems, you have a lot of issues arising from that, the noisiness in the data, the multimodality. The one that intrigues me the most is how do I combine image and voice together from two separate sensors? How do I do the synchronization? Also, when it comes to healthcare applications, the synchronization is extremely critical. So if you monitor the heart with other systems, how do you do this synchronization at the millisecond, nanosecond type of application? Okay, so let me get into the five senses. We have vision, we have smell, we have hearing, we have taste, we have the tactile. Right? AI, artificial intelligence, tries to mimic the human, okay? And quite often in one of these five senses. There's tactile sensors. I believe there's also for the taste. Though we don't see a lot of, in engineering, yes, you get a lot of sensors for identifying taste. In business applications, I haven't seen that many applications. The one sense that we try to mimic the most is vision. Why? Maybe because it's such a natural thing. As humans, we grow up creating this huge and vast set of information from things we see, and for us it's easy to identify if something is normal or not normal. So a lot of activity is on vision, and I'll show some examples. Just a parenthesis here, I see fewer, but still considerable amount of work on acoustics and hearing types of applications. In my opinion, acoustics, for a business perspective, can actually bring more value than vision. But for whatever reason, we just don't do as much there. Now, why is that? Why do I say that? I've worked with clients that deal with large engines, and they have, in the process I saw that their technicians, their engineers, worked for 20 years, and they develop this acute sense of hearing that they walk into a room and say, that engine doesn't sound right. If I walk in, they all sound the same. I can't feel the difference. But they trained over time to hear the difference. However, without any training, I can walk in and say, that thing doesn't look right. So I help the human more if I provide help on the acoustics rather than on the vision. Humans are much better on the vision. Also hearing, as we get older, we lose our hearing. What did you say? So working on acoustics is something that brings a lot of value that maybe there are certainly applications, but in general, overall, the focus seems to be on vision. Okay, so what do you do? How do you use computer vision? What type of applications can you have? I'm sure you all know you can do better inspection in cities, identify the movement of traffic. In construction areas, you can proactively see, oops, something is going wrong, or you can even detect a worker not wearing his helmet. In the middle, you see the cars. You can identify for insurance purpose, this car is new, this one is scratched, this one is total, something needs to be done. Image processing in radiology, in medical applications, and so forth. So let me share a couple of examples of such applications. One is to use visual inspection for analysis in manufacturing. The particular case that I will show is on manufacturing of car seats for cars, on leather car seats for cars. Okay, what can go wrong there? If you have leather seats, it's easy to have a tear in the manufacturing or a wrinkle that is not acceptable as an end product. And what if we could train a system to look at cameras to look at the cars as they're, at the chairs as they're manufactured and identify if there's an issue or not. So the idea is to define something that I can train a system for. Remember, whatever we do is narrow, it has to be trained. It has to improve the client satisfaction to bring in the business perspective. Quite often these tasks that we try to automate, they're very boring for a person. Can you imagine every day going to work and just look at car seats and find wrinkles? So we want to improve the employee situation, not do boring activities, and to have a better product. So in the way this project was progressing, first we had to have a number of images where we could identify if a leather seat has wrinkles or tears, and if it did have, then identify them and label them. What type of excuse me 1 second, I can hear my. We could identify what type of a defect it was. So every defect needs its own label. Also, we need to augment the data set. So if I have a picture of the whole manufacturing floor, I want to isolate the chair, I want to isolate the chair. This is a chair, this is a chair, take it from different angles, do all the scaling and rotation, do the training in the cloud, and then on the edge, do the classification of the data sets. Or more visually, this is the situation, how it looks. So this is an activity that is done, it started as a research project. We thought we became quite good in identifying the tears. The interesting thing is that the cameras are much better than the human eye, so in that respect they even outperform. But then there are cases where, yes, there might be a tear, but nobody sees it, except for, it's so minuscule, so it can really pass. So what's the threshold that we allow things to move forward? This was done first on one isolated location. When it became successful, we tried to roll it out to the manufacturing plant. So multiple lines in the plant. Discussions there were, do I use a computer for each line? Or do I use one central computer that allows me to collect all the information, which also improves my learning? There's never one answer that fits all. It depends on the cost, particular situation, communication, bandwidth, etc. Once a manufacturing plant is addressed, then the question is, I have multiple manufacturing plants. How do I roll it out? It takes time. It's not something that is done overnight, but it's an interesting process. Another application that I thought was very interesting was identifying the Quraan Effect, which is actually the ionization around electric lines that causes this luminous glow and the hissing sound. So Working with a partner and using drones, we identify, use visual recognition, visual analysis to identify, yes, there's a Quraan effect in these lines, and I need to do something. So yes, after training, the model is able to detect. It's a proof of concept. Difficult to put in complete production, but it's a first step. And lastly, the final example that you have probably all heard in other contexts is using satellite image for land registry. Many homeowners build swimming pools but don't declare it. So the record you have in the land registry does not correspond to reality. Can I use a satellite image and identify such possibilities, not only for pools but for buildings? And there you can imagine this is additional revenue for the city. Pools carry a cost. Building extensions carry an even higher cost, although they are not as common types of frauds as pools. Very nice. Let me get into my biggest surprise going from, let's say, research to industry. Up to last year, this time, I was working primarily on industrial types of applications, and it was more looking at models to improve manufacturing, to improve complicated things that humans couldn't do well. However, when I moved to Accenture, I realized that by far the biggest application of AI and analytics that we find, it's not all these complicated models, but it's bots, chatbots, virtual agents. To me, it was a surprise, but it has a very simple explanation. This is the first thing that managers and chief information officers think when they want to automate boring tasks or a lot of the activities. So yes, the winner is virtual agents or bots. Not only chatbots, though I do see a lot more chatbots than other types of bots. And the idea there is, can I get all the information? It's email, it's SMSs, voice, it's instant messages. Can I collect it and then understand what it means, apply semantics, do the knowledge graphs, do the contextual analysis, and at the end offer a service that is automated. Maybe it's a reply per email. Maybe I'm a customer service, I get a lot of emails. I don't want to have someone there read all the emails and reply. A lot of the things are always the same. So can I automate it and immediately the emails are classified and the solution is given back? Or identify, this is not something I've trained my system to do, I send it to a human. A lot of chatbots. And a lot of RPA. So also for me, RPA was something, I didn't know what it was. It's robotic process automation. What does it mean? It's business process modeling. So a lot of the so-called AI applications now in industry are really what I, as an academic, if I put my academic hat on, I wouldn't even call AI. It's rule-based process automation. So if what you do all day is sit down and put a stamp on things, hey, I can sort of put it through a printer that puts some type of a digital stamp. It's rule-based, no intelligence needed. But that is where a lot of the companies are today. How can you ask the companies that still manually put a stamp to think of all the other more advanced things? So, to me, it was a very interesting revelation. But nonetheless, doing bots has also its own challenges. It's an integration software engineering challenge. I'll skip this one. I'll go to my favorite example. A recent work that we did with the Irish revenue collection. I like the Irish. It was my time in Ireland was definitely one of the best experiences, both from the type of work, but also experiencing the Irish culture. And if you've ever been to Ireland, they definitely have a very distinct accent. Okay, so I thought this was very interesting. But on the serious part, the idea was the Irish Revenue Office wanted to offer proactive and more timely help to its citizens. There were some tax changes that required some additional effort in submitting your taxes, and they were inundated with a lot of costs, and they were all on the same type of question. Also, there were some situations where elderly people that before didn't have to submit certain things, now they did. And it was also desired that we provide extra effort for this type of population that is not very keen with digital technologies. So we created a chatbot that can understand Irish language and can classify the types of intents of the call and reply back also with the appropriate accent. What I also like there from an industrial perspective is that combination of 3 different technologies were used. So Google was used for the speech to text because it was better in understanding Irish. Watson from IBM was used for the natural language processing to understand the intent. And then Amazon technology was used on the reply back. It was better for that situation. But a very interesting project, and also a typical example of a lot of the requests we see. Another thing to keep in mind, these chatbots quite often are programmed for a specific intent. If you don't bring the intent in, it's very difficult, you just don't address it. The idea is to bring all the semantics, all the appropriate knowledge representation, and have the system that learns and it can jump to other fields. Not by far, the majority is not there, some few examples, but you have to start somewhere. And this is where we are industry-wise. Okay, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay, I thought I would put up examples of complete projects we had. Most of what I showed there so far or discussed is really proof of concept. What are some of the examples where we can talk about end-to-end or ongoing full-scale project? The one I have is for monitoring IT processes. So this is for a company, a telecommunications company that has its servers, and different applications at different times of the day go through the servers. At peak times, there's the risk that they are overloaded, and if they're overloaded, they crash. So can we proactively monitor the load? And if we see that it's going to be overloaded, we take an action. Standard application of machine learning to train the system of what to expect, and then predict what the overload will be in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, etc. And if you see that there's a high risk for overloading, then preemptively take action and avoid the shutdown. And the results were, okay, so you have the standard, you train the model. First of all, you do, you identify the KPIs that you need to use. Then you have, you train the model, you test it, and you bring it into production. So I believe in this particular case, out of 160 parameters, we identified 10 to be key predictors. And the system in operation is one that actually, for the industry, it reaches pretty good results. Think of the numbers reversed. At 15 minutes earlier, it has an accuracy of 84%, half an hour before it's 77, and 1 hour before, of course, it's not as good, it's at 69. Actually, the numbers have improved since the slide was generated, but it was a successful case where the monitoring did prevent bad failures. Actually, it's been running for a year, and typically they get 3 to 4 failures a year, but this past year, 2 cases were preempted. There was no failure, and there were 2 significant cases that they were able to act and avoid. And the last example I have is on churn prediction. So customer relationship management, CRM type of application. You have a lot of customers in telecommunications again. In Europe, we have a lot of options which the communication company to have, and people change constantly. My children are 1 month they are with one mobile company, another month with different, because they are given different incentives. This is a lot of, losing a customer is pretty hard financially on these telcos. So the idea was, can I predict churn? Can I, out of my customer base, can I identify which ones are more susceptible to leave? How do I find that? And once I do, what can I do to keep them? So things that you can check is communication from these customers. They can send you an email and say, hey, I'm not happy, my bill was too high. And then do some sentiment analysis. So the new thing here, and why I brought the example up, churn analysis has been old. We've been doing it for a number of years. But using sentiment analysis to enhance the probability of prediction is new. So chat logs that were scripted in text and emails were analyzed using sentiment analysis APIs to identify this person is angry, is aggressive, has a tendency to do this or that, and our prediction was enhanced. Once we predicted who would leave and who not, those that we thought would leave, we applied some incentive mechanisms, price reduction or multiple of other offers on top to try and keep them. At the end, we do a risk analysis to see, okay, the ones that we thought would leave, have our incentives work? Did we keep those in the next period? Certainly, there are some people we never thought that would leave and they left. So it's part of the risk that we have. And then there are others we thought that would leave and we didn't do anything about them and they still didn't leave. So certainly, these are things that we can do to monitor the project. Great. The last one. I thought that was the last one. Yeah, I do have the video, but I think my audio doesn't work.
If you want to show it, okay.
Okay, so I can speak over this example. It's actually one of my favorite applications. This was work that was done with Madrid Metro. Madrid Metro is one of the biggest metro stations in Europe. And it has, I forget the number, but millions of passengers go through it every day. The idea of the project, which started, it started 4 years ago, so it wasn't done overnight, but the idea was, can I work with the energy usage for ventilation? Ventilation is the second cause of energy consumption after driving. So, can I monitor my ventilation? Can I use smart techniques to adapt the ventilation in each of the stations in the Madrid Metro? There are many. Everyone has its own geography, its own network structure. There are 600 shafts with 900 ventilators in these 600 shafts. So it's a huge problem. Weather conditions certainly plays an effect here. So on warm days, I don't want it to be too warm. On cold days, not too cold. My passengers basically need to be comfortable. So I cannot just shut down to save energy. I have to take care of the customer comfort. And I also need to take care of CO2 emissions. So collaborating with a company that was a specialist in CO2 emissions. The system in real time monitors the ventilation in each of the metro stations using genetic algorithms and reinforcement learning to control at appropriate times. It already saved 20% in usage. It went live beginning of the year and it's still being used. So it was a very, very nice example. Too bad we couldn't get the voice. Okay. So let me conclude my talk with some research challenges that we see from the application of these projects. I already mentioned the issue we have in working with sensor data, the multimodality, the noisiness, the cohort data and learning. All these aspects, of course, are big areas for the research community. I also mentioned about semantics and ontologies. Yeah. We had an example where we tried to use existing techniques to interact with appliances, let's say with oven, and the concept of an oven was not in there. The system could not understand what is an oven because we didn't put the context of these appliances. And finally, the semantics and conversational aspects. But what I want to focus or spend a bit more time is the observations from an industrial application. What it became quite clear with all my teams is that, Google does a fantastic job in speech, right? Actually, I'm always amazed. I switch from English to Greek and it switches as well my speech to text. Same for Alexa, Amazon Alexa. But why? Because they have the whole world using it and providing information. It's their business model. All these applications, consumer applications, they benefit from the vast population who are applying them. Not the same for enterprise applications or industry applications. Quite often our interaction and our analysis is very narrow, and if you don't know the terminology, it's very hard to do any work. So that is an issue. It's not as easy to take the success we have in consumer applications to industry applications. At the same time, industry keeps its information, its data to itself. Every company, it's their resource, right? Data is the new oil. For them, it's their oil. Why should they share the information with other companies? So we find this non-sharing does not help broaden up the data pool for the semantics and ontologies. Again, if I look at the manufacturing company, if I look at the plan A that focuses on this product, it might be quite different than the same company focusing on a different product. So it's very, very context and area specific. Statistical models, it requires a lot of depth and understanding of the field. I already talked a little bit about anomaly analysis. But what is probably the biggest inhibitor that always comes up is the shortage of skills. Still, there are not enough skills for people within the companies to absorb the innovation and then maintain it. And a company cannot simply constantly have consultants or experts to be there. They need to have the experts in-house to absorb it. So shortage of skills is by far the biggest inhibitor. And then the last comment I put there, it's more comical or entertaining. It's quite often, when we talk with different companies, there are the people that are very resistant, they don't believe in anything, and they just push you back. They just simply won't accept that you can help them. And I say AI is the source of evil. Anything that is wrong is because of that. And then there are the others that think that you can do anything. And you're going to say, hey, you trained my system, but I asked it about my trip tomorrow and you didn't know about it. So, it's the two extremes. They expect that it's an intelligent system, it's a human. No, we're not there yet. It can do everything. So I find it, the two extremes are always entertaining. And when I initiate discussions, I try to identify, okay, where does this person sit in this extreme spectrum? Because you have to have the discussion aligned to that. And with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take
Thank you, Eleni, for the very interesting and exciting talk. I think a lot of times, we spend a lot of time on equations, but then it's very important to see how these applications are used in practice and where the industry is at, and where our industry views artificial intelligence and a lot of the things that academia is working on. So I think this was a very important talk, very inspiring talk. We have time for questions, so feel free.
Do you think the use of AI in industry should be regulated, restricted, prohibited for some sections of the industry? For example, the military-industrial complex, or the example you showed where it was classifying people of color as criminals more often. Do you think it should be outright prohibited in some contexts, or do you think it's just a matter of getting there, especially when it comes to decision-making and action-taking?
Well, certainly in Europe it's quite regulated, and I think for the right reasons. My belief is yes. And definitely there are cases where it should be regulated or prohibited, and it's not, because simply we are not there yet from a technology perspective in the transparency, explainability, and the trust we can put in the techniques. I believe we will get there, but I'm also a strong believer that the regulations do help. There might be scientists that believe in the free use of it. I don't think it's a tool that we don't know, we cannot control. So it's like a child we cannot control. And there were examples. What was it? Facebook, that they had two chatbots that they created their own language, and certainly wasn't the desired effect. So yes, things can get out of control. So complete prohibition, maybe, until we get there. Yes, it's not in my position to take a stand, but I can think of cases where, a lot of care needs to be taken and be responsible before we apply.
Questions?
From your experience, how do you see the collaboration in companies like Accenture, consulting company, and has a good view of what the industry needs with universities?
Very strong. The world is so complex that no one company, no one group can solve everything. Also, the field is evolving very fast. So Accenture is very strong on establishing university connections, because we're not academics, we're not in the field to keep track of the changes that come up, and universities are. So there are many good examples of collaboration with universities.
My question was a little bit deeper. There are a lot of people here that are looking for subjects for their PhD thesis, and they want, and they have ambition to see. I mean, Mario and I, we give them equations, but sometimes they don't like the equations. They prefer something to see something that practical value. How will you see this? For example, some of the problems you showed there is a problem that some of our students and postdocs are also working with. One with power, and the thing is how to see a more big collaboration between universities and
So I don't think we've had discussions with University of Cyprus,
Yeah.
right? But last week I was on a call with students from the university in Portugal doing their master's thesis with Accenture on a problem that was primarily motivated by their field, but they were looking for a client situation, of course under the right conditions, to guide them so they do something meaningful. And this, I mean, Portugal is only one example. There are many such collaborations that we have. Is really person dependent. So I mean, it's something that I would also be interested to get to interact on. Outside Accenture, I became aware of a project that is run at University of Munich, and I'm not sure which of the universities in Munich, but the professor there has like hackathons where he brings in industries with problems and then creates teams of students. It's not actually hackathons, but it's more industry comes in with a problem, and then there are students that indicate whether they like to work on that problem or not. And then the professor, as a master's thesis or whatever semester thesis, goes off with his students and tries to solve the problem. And this is initiated from the university and they reach out companies. But there's also a direct. What was that question?
There's one in the back. Yeah.
So, George Willis, thank you very much for this presentation. I could relate a lot with the many things that you mentioned. So, my question is, around 2000, 2002, 2008, if I'm not wrong, there was a big trend of artificial intelligence again, and semantic reasoning, semantic representation on the cyber part of the world, not so much on the physical part. And this, in my opinion, there was not much success in the applications part of all this theory and research and even industrial research at that time. And probably the mistake was that we were trapped in the extremes that you mentioned at the end. So we wanted to do everything, and people were not, the industry was not ready for that. So today, because of the advancement in the physical world with the Internet of Things, etc., we have again this big trend for semantic interoperability and semantics knowledge representation to make sense of this data and use it for supporting the decision makers. So what do we have to do different now in order to avoid staying with the keywords again in 10 years to have real applications of these technologies?
Okay. My answer might be very simplistic, but in 2000, when we interacted, I say we, so I put myself in the research corner because I was there in 2000. When we interacted with industry, the people we talked to had absolutely have never seen these fields in their studies. Right? So they finished business degrees, they never came across analytics. I can say even the same for the mundane and now very simple area of optimization. When I got my PhD, it was out in the sky. People thought it was out in the sky and didn't know what to do with it. And it took a few years before everyone was talking about analytics. So I think it's also this maturity. Once these graduates come out and they take on positions in industry, they're more open. And I think, and that's why I say, I try to identify a person I talk to, what is their background. And many of the projects that I would say successful in the sense that there's interest and we progress it to the next step, quite often it is because the manager or the CEO who has an engineering or a mathematics degree, they were exposed in courses, they saw what it can do. Many did a PhD in neural networks and then never used it, because also in the 80s there was this hype of neural networks, and they never used it. And they were frustrated that they couldn't use it, and then all of a sudden they see they use it. So it's not only, maybe it's a little bit how we package it, and there's also the you know, the scientists, it's very difficult to make themselves clear what they mean. It's a little bit of that, but it's also the audience is not exposed. So the decision makers, and usually I don't want to put age discrimination in the equation here, but if you spend 20 years running a company one way and things went right, you have part-time changing. And the thing we also get a lot is if someone is in their 50s or close to retirement, why should they, you know, the reaction is, why should I go through all this change? Is not guaranteed, and I will not benefit from it. You know, some of the learnings in how to communicate, of course, you know, we got that, but it's also the maturity of the audience. So I strongly believe on that as well.
Actually, I was gonna, well, thank you for the nice talk, first of all. But I was gonna make a case that one of the problems that we have in academia, at least, is the lack of bad data. When I say bad data, what do I mean? You showed the problem with the insulators, the power line insulators. This is something we tried to tackle a couple of years ago. The problem was that we couldn't train our vision system to detect faults or whatever because we didn't have faults. So we didn't know how the faults like. Is it something that the industry enjoys a relatively good advantage in terms of that, or is it something that you guys are also struggling with?
No, we don't struggle. It's
Okay,
easier.
that's good.
It's easier. So the first project I did when I moved to industrial research was to analyze medical data from a hospital. We had pregnant men, menopause men, new mothers at the age of 90. So, you know, and data cleansing is by far, no, we don't struggle. There's a lot of bad data, but I do know, I do appreciate what you're saying, because also when I was in academia, either we made up the data, you know, we used synthetic data, and simply industry is not always willing to share information. It's getting better, I think it's getting better.
Actually, if I may, we have a good collaboration with the electricity authority. The problem is, when they had a fault, they had to either let us know to go take, scan, take a picture to make sure it happens, but it kind of risked their operational status because they had to fix it. And this is one of the problems we had, not also in this area, but also, for example, in obstacle avoidance or other vision measures. That's why I'm mentioning it, because this is something that universities usually struggle with.
Yeah, no, industry is exposed. They get all this, but yeah, sometimes you just have to fix it right away, and or you don't bring it into your data set. We've had cases like that as well. Excuse me, quite often we don't do the analysis because the data is just so unreliable. So there is bad data to indicate something went wrong, but it's unreliable because of the processes not being followed, maybe because of time pressure.
Hi. Actually, this is more of it's not exactly a question, but it's more to see your take on it. And it's coming from someone who's not an AI expert, but I know a bit about neurophysiology and neuroscience. So going from sensing to a decision in the brain actually has a couple of things that are a bit different than what we usually do on a computer. So sensing and perception is not the same thing. So we don't see what the sensor sees. And then going a step further, going from perception to a decision is heavily relies on emotion. So if you lose your emotional experience pathway, you become incapable of making a decision, which means that you make decisions based on some sort of emotional weight. You cannot choose between two soft drinks, for example. You become incapable of deciding it. So it's interesting to hear about cognitive intelligence, and I was wondering how much of these, let's say, bio-inspired processes coming to cognitive intelligence?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in AI in an academic sense, though I deal a lot in the applications. There's a whole field on perception. It's very big. So I don't know if there's anyone from an AI or perception background. But I totally agree with you. And I would not trust. So the biggest, it's easy to use a system to find the ventilation, right? It's engineering type of application. But I would be very careful if I were to simulate human behavior. And I was fortunate to be working with a banking consortium when we had the financial crisis in 2010, right, in Europe. And it was interesting, before things went down, our partners in the bank were saying, oh, it's just unsustainable, something is wrong. But the greediness or the human emotion could not be modeled. We didn't know how to present it. So people saw it going down, but they couldn't model it and they couldn't stop it. And whenever we try to get into situations where we try to simulate market elements based on people behavior, it's extremely very good. So I don't have an answer. I agree with you. I don't have an answer, but there's a very big field of perception because it's different what you see and what you perceive, and how people behave. And I always say it's difficult to put an equation for irrational behavior.
A lot of times I think we don't want to mimic the human behavior. I think on a lot, because we always think this is what we should do.
But that is also why I believe machines will never take over. There's some element of human that you simply cannot.
Okay, is there a last question, or shall we? Okay.
You said that the AI is trained on data, and actually most of the companies, they collect real data from everyday life and they train their AI models. Is there a way to create artificial data that are very close to the actual ones? I mean, some algorithms to create artificial data that are more representative instead of waiting the humans to give feedback to the system to become better?
We do, yeah, sometimes companies do create, but not to be used as to get started while they collect the real data. So the recommendation is always, yes, we need something to get started, or we need quite often to do a POC, and we cannot wait to collect all the information. So let's have synthetic data, but to take, I haven't seen an example where we used, or companies have used artificial data to take real business decisions. They might have used it to test the system, but not put it in production.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.